Hello, and welcome to the Laney Photography Department's video on using the Rebel T6 reflective light meter. In order to use this light meter, it's helpful for us to review what the camera needs for a good exposure. The meter and the camera essentially want to see a middle tone. We're not exposing for black, we're not exposing for white, we're exposing for the tones in between, and black and white will fall where they will fall. We have three factors that influence brightness and darkness. That is, shutter speed is brighter or darker, aperture, more or less light, ISO, more or less amplification. All three of those about brighter and darker, all three of them have to work together to get a good exposure in the camera. Take a look at the tableau in the back and we can see shutter speed, aperture, and ISO. But before we get there, we have to set the meter. We have to give it a foundation. And we're going to do that by choosing the metering mode. This camera has three metering modes, but the one that we're concerned with is partial metering. It's called center weighted in other cameras. What this does is it takes the central portion of your screen and focuses its measuring there. So if you were able to come forward and put your meter right there at an 18% gray, something in the middle, something not black, something not white, you could get a good value and you could go on and make your exposures. Partial metering set. The next thing we're going to do is kind of give the meter another reference point, and that is the ISO, kind of how powerful the meter needs to be. You can see that ISOs go from 100 in full sun, at 1600 they go up to 6400, they go way, way, very high now. But with experience, we figure out which of these ISOs we want to use. I decided to use 1600 because of where my subject was in the room. And you can see that I have set the ISO at 1600. The next thing I want to do is I want to set the aperture at 5.6. Now, 5.6 is a great place for this lens. It's where it's pretty sharp and it's open enough to let in a fair amount of light, and it's small enough to give you a certain amount of depth of field. Right? Take a look at this. We have fixed and set ISO. We have fixed and set aperture. And the only thing in the triangle that needs to be decided now is one factor, and that is shutter speed, brighter or darker vis-a-vis these two factors. So we're going to use this meter by changing shutter speeds. So we will start here at 1/160th, 5/6 at ISO 1600, and these are the two factors that are already fixed. They will not change, but I want you to watch this here. This is the meter right here. And I want you to watch this area. When I press the shutter button halfway, you can see a little indicator comes in. Boom, ba-boom, boom, ba-boom. Now, it will blink and it will catch your attention. What this says is this is our sweet spot and we are 1-2 stops underexposed. That's what the minus is telling us. So let's make a change to something that is half as fast, lets in twice as much light, and you can see the meter, boom, move over to just one stop underexposed. Aperture and ISO do not change. Those are the fundamental settings. We are changing shutter speed and operating the meter in that fashion. At 1/40th of a second, twice as much light comes in, and you're right there at the sweet spot. Depending upon what you're metering, that can be good or bad, but we'll just say that this is the sweet spot. At 1/20th of a second, twice as much light gets in, and we start overexposing by a stop. And at 1/10th, we overexpose another stop. And this is what it looks like. At 1/160th, looks sort of dark, and you can see things are starting to clip. That is, the highlights are blocking up. At the same time, even at this exposure, at the same time as the blacks are blocking up. Your LCD has curious contrast facility, and it's not as rich as, say, your big computer is. So this is just something to help us get started, to get in the ballpark. At 1/80th of a second, you can see things start opening up and we get a lot more clipping. Well, again, that's the LCD, but we have to learn to read that. We're starting to see some detail in the shadows. At 1/40th of a second, we're, of course, clipping again, and there's lots of detail in the shadows. Maybe too much, but this is what the meter says is a middle exposure. At 1/20th of a second, we're getting another full stop of light. We're overexposed. You can see it just blasting out here. And at 1/10th, there you go, it's just blasting out more. The point is, aperture and ISO do not change. By simply changing the shutter speed, you can get different exposures and different meter readings. We'll go through it very quickly. Watch the meter. Boom, 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 boom. Let's take the two that sort of look the best. 1/80th and 1/160th. Well, which do we use? Well, I'm not sure either, but here's what we do now. There are two more shutter speeds between these two, 1/100th and 1/125th. What I would do is do another bracket at 1/80th, 1/100th, 1/125th, and 1/60th, and take a look at it and pick the one that I thought was the best. That's going to get you started. That will become more and more accurate and quicker with more experience. Let's think about using the meter by changing aperture. Now the shutter speed will be fixed, and we're just going to fix it at like 140. In order to change your apertures, you need to hold down this key, the AV button, and you need to spin your command wheel. I'm holding down the AV button, I'm spinning the command wheel, and I've gone from 5/6 to F4. I take my thumb off it, and it goes back to F4. Now, this is a critical thing. The only way that you can change your apertures is by holding down that AV button. And notice as soon as you take your thumb off the AV button, these arrows go back over to the shutter speed. So anytime you touch the command wheel now, it will show shutter speed. When the arrows are in the aperture, you can change the aperture. And you need to remember that if it goes to shutter speed and you want to change aperture, you need to press that button. If you just start spinning that dial without pressing that button, you're going to mess up your shutter speeds. In any event, at that shutter speed, that's what it looks like. I change it again to F8. That's what it looks like. And we can go through this process over. Notice F8, 1600, 1/40th. These two do not change, but we are changing the aperture. And we can go through an entire range of apertures and see sample images and make a decision, just as we did with shutter speed. This takes practice. After all, you do it like many things, you'll do it very, very quickly, and it will really improve your results. Thank you all for your kind attention.